Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Space in Africa's webinar series titled 2025 Industry Outlook, Implementation and Impact. My name is Mustafa Derawumi, a senior analyst at Space in Africa, and I'm truly honored to be your host today. Africa's space industry has made incredible strides in recent years, and 2024 was another important year for Africa's big space ambition. From government-led space programs to sustain growth of new space companies, to infrastructural development, to increase funding for space program and R&D. So far, this progress has set a strong precedent for an even greater impact through coordinated growth across all industry segments in 2025 and beyond. Our focus today would be to evaluate the tangible effects of these developments that I just mentioned on Africa's socio-economic landscape. Because quite frankly, the most important measure of and justification also for the money spent on space technology development is its impact on the economy, its impact on the environment, and most importantly, its impact on people. So we will discuss how these infrastructural projects and also policy changes have influenced sectors like agriculture, connectivity, disaster management, urban planning, and so on. And we also provide some insights into the strategic direction for the African space industry in 2025 and beyond. To discuss this topic, I am joined by leading experts in Africa's space ecosystem. I have Dr. Zola Najal, is the General Manager of the Angola Space Management Office, GGPEN. I also have with me Professor John Peters, is the Chief Engineer at Aerospace System Research Institute, ASRI. I also have Jessie Indaba. She's the CEO of Astrophica Technologies. And I have Dr. David Deve. He's the CEO of QCon. But before we begin, let me give a quick rundown of today's proceeding. As it's our practice on webinars like this, the webinar is divided into two main segments. The first one is where I'll pose some carefully curated questions to the speakers to gain insights into different thematic areas. And the second part is where the audience will have the opportunity to send in their questions to the speakers directly. So at this point, I'd like to say a very big thank you to everyone that has joined us on today's program. And as we progress through the discussions, if you have any questions, if you have any comments for our speakers, please kindly drop them in the Q&A segment box, and we will take as much as we can during the segment. Dr. Zolana, I'm going to direct my first question to you, sir. So reflecting on 2024, just like we mentioned, there are a lot of things that happened. But what would you consider some of the most impactful space development in Africa and why?
Mustafa, thank you so much. Once again, happy 2025. And a big thank to Space in Africa, as always, doing an amazing job. That's why I don't get tireless supporting you guys, helping the space industry in Africa. Sending my greetings for my team's panelists. And back to your question, Mustafa. For over 15 years since I've joined the space industry, I think 2024 was really an amazing year for a lot of reasons. Mustafa, if we see the space economy today in Africa, well, we see that according to Space in Africa reports, we see that it's $22 billion as we speak. And I will divide the space economy in some critical segments and on the verticals of the space industry when we talk about upstream, midstream, and downstream. So it's not enough time to describe everything. I will focus on some of the most important ones. So let's start. We see even Djibouti and small players coming in, launching satellites last year. And all the way going to see two countries that has been setting the pace in space in the continent, South Africa and Egypt. Last year, we hosted the new Space Africa in Luanda, Angola. And it was incredible to see what South Africa and Egypt was doing. And then due to that, I was invited by South Africa, by my brother Mbulani. In Africa, we call each other brothers. My brother Mbulani, where he hosted in October the space conference, and I was keen to see, and of course we had different tours to CSIR, amazing research and transfer tech to the different private companies in South Africa, what they're doing in upstream, manufacturing satellite components and exporting all over the world is amazing, right? As well as Egypt, right? I was fortunate to be there, Space City in Egypt, because this is type of investment right now the continent needs. Space Cities is 123 acres of land. We're talking about fully AIT facility to integrate up to 600 kilogram satellite. Can you imagine that? So Egypt today can assemble and integrate and test full satellite in the continent with this magnitude. Very few countries in Africa can do that. I think that is a thumbs up for Egypt. By the way, we know that Egypt was the first one launching a satellite in Africa in 98. I think it came South Africa in 99. So they are very consistent with the growth in the continent. So what is the big takeaway for all of this in 2024? Let's go down to midstream first. Midstream, Angola definitely has been want to be one of the leaders in the Southern Africa region. As you know, we launched Angosat 2, the only one Southern Africa region high throughput satellite, and the only one in Africa as well with this capabilities, one of the brand new one. And we have been really operating this satellite successfully. And so far, we connected more than 400,000 connected people in Angola because, as you know, keep on saying that connectivity, satellite connectivity for internet in Africa is the only way we're going to bridge this gap where we have 36% of us still only connect to the internet and the remain is dark, right? Doesn't make sense. And we keep on putting money on the wrong things, right? So Angola last year did a tremendous job in getting more Angolans and Africa connected. So when you go to downstream, I will go to Kenya. I was very impressed with the Kenya startup ecosystem. They also be very consistent for the last decades, right? It's impressive what they've been doing, right? Of course, South Africa is there as well. I just feel like they need to regain this leadership because I feel like Kenya is really doing something amazing in terms of innovation with startups. And you can see the immediate impact to the user. This is where I want to wrap up, right? I always say it doesn't make sense if we just want to do space programs if people cannot feel the results, right? So, and I was fortunate to see in 2024 some countries pay more attention on the impact of the space industry in the continent to the people, right? I mean, it's endless, but I think this lay out the discussion on some of the amazing things happening in 2024. Thank you, Mustafa.
Thank you very much for opening the floor, sir. Dr. Dawi, I'm going to pose the next question to you. It's something else that has been in the conversation since the past few years. Is the conversation about LEO satellite connectivity. So, in your own point of view, how would you say the influx of LEO satellite connectivity providers have affected telecommunication landscape globally and also in Africa? Are they solving Africa's connectivity challenges, or do you think they are creating new complexities in the market?
Mustafa, thank you, and good afternoon to everybody on the forum. We appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for Space in Africa for creating it. I think the debate about satellite is growing and thriving. And yes, as Dr. Jawa confirmed, lots of development happening. And I think we need to see it in context. There is a lot of media awareness around satellites, specifically Our perspective is communication satellites. So we're specializing in communication satellites. So that would exclude Earth observation and the big family of other type of satellites. And around that space was mostly, of course, the low Earth orbit satellites. And in that, a lot of discussion about Starlink coming in and OneWeb and all of that. So I think if we add a bit of context, and just to give it a perspective, so generally a low Earth orbit satellite can have capacity of about 1 terabits per second. So if we talk about 1 terabits per second of a satellite, typical satellite, and we make some simulations and calculations, if those satellites are between 500 and 1,000 kilometers above Earth, it will give you about 40 satellites around Africa. So it means that the industry is provisioning around 40 terabytes, miskien up more. So let's say between 40 and 100 terabytes of capacity over Africa. Now, bringing that into context, the Google cable, the Google Equano cable that landed quite recently, that is 18 terabytes. So yes, there's a lot of capacity coming into the industry, and yes, there's a lot of drive and discussion. But in context, it's not that much. So yes, the satellite industry is growing, but I feel sometimes that the focus and the sort of, let's say, the concern about satellite, those coming in and maybe they're driving complexity and maybe they're upsetting the existing telcos is perhaps a little bit out of context. Satellites will bring a potent contribution, but relatively still a very small contribution. So it's not necessary, in my opinion, that there's so much resistance to inviting those telcos into the continent. I mean, if you take 40 terabytes, that can maybe service up to, say, 4 million users. Yes, it's a lot of users, and we're going to see a lot of good growth and development in the industry. But it's not that type of volume that will really upset the mobile network operators on the continent. It's also not quite the volume that can actually potentially twist the landscape of the telcos revenue. So I think in that perspective, generally the satellite operator is contributing. They are bringing a little bit of complexity to adapt with regulations. Yes, it is a different architecture as was opposed to fixed line and fixed wireless and mobile network operators. So yes, the regulators need to sit back and consider how to adopt to the technology, how to adopt to the landscape. But all in all, I think it can bring a very, very positive push into the market and a very much needed tool to resolve the connectivity for areas that's traditionally not so easy to reach with either fiber or fixed wireless or the MNO. So I think generally they are solving connectivity problems, and the concerns and the changes, not that really much complexities, I think, Mustafa. No. So I think that it's a contributing industry. It's addressing a very specific niche in a very particular way that's really beyond the reach of the normal technology. So all in all, a very much add-on piece within the technology bundle.
All right. Thank you very much for making that clarification, because a whole lot of people make that wrong assumption as to what LEO is and how they matter in the grand scheme of things, basically. So Jesse, my next question is to you. EO is that segment of the industry that employs the most number of people. It's also the one where that has the least requirements for entry, which makes it suitable for many Africans, young Africans to take up a position in this and also drive the uptake and adoption of EO technologies. So my question to you would be, what do you consider Africa's biggest untapped opportunity in the EO segment? And how do you think we can accelerate this adoption across other sectors that are growing, like maybe like finance, like urban planning and security?
Thanks, Mustafa. Thanks to Space in Africa for having us. And good day to all my colleagues on the panel. So I understand that Dr. Zolano and Dr. Davi have touched on the improvements that we are experiencing in the continent. and that we are not fully utilizing space data to see the impact. Dr. Zolana spoke broadly about really looking at the impact in order for us to measure the work that we do, if it does have an impact or not. I would love to say, as much as we are seeing South Africa, Egypt, Algeria, Kenya, Angola, Nigeria, but Africa is bigger than that, much bigger than that. So I think we need to look at developing infrastructure to support what we need to do, capacity building and promoting collaboration between government, private sector, research institutions. I'm a product of that, by the way, and not leaving out the end users. How else would we know what we are doing if it is indeed benefiting our nations, if we are not involving the end users? So I think involving the end users would help us in accelerating the adoption of space use across sectors. You made an example with finance as an example. There are a number of insurance products that have been developed. I know a company that I worked for 12 years ago. Their biggest client on the downstream side were insurance companies. So, but what I think we should also look at, working closely with the statistical agencies. I know there is Statcom Africa, but I think if we are going to see the improvement continentally, we have to take it down to the communities. So these statistical agencies, we know that they collect and compile and analyze and disseminate statistics to inform decision making, policy formulation, and research in various sectors. So why do I say we have to look at working closely with them? Maybe this is a selfish idea for me as a space person now. Working closely with them would give us an understanding on the population demographics, economic indicators, social trends, environmental conditions. All of that data is the data that we need in identifying the challenges that the communities are having, so that we can pinpoint where the gaps are, so that we can come up with newer Earth observation applications that we haven't touched on. So it really would help for us to work closely with them, but also the agencies would also be benefiting, because using Earth observation tools to complement the data that they've collected on the ground would assist in the accuracy, the timeliness, all of that would assist them in making the decisions, ensuring that everything is covered, because we have these tools, but I don't think we are making use of them effectively. And I guess it is, again, because we continue working in silos. You find the upstream. I'm glad Dr. Zolana touched on the different streams that we have, your upstream, your midstream, and your downstream. And we've seen that in the past, all of those streams were not working together. And I think just collaborative effort of all of the streams, including the end users, your end users, I'm talking about different government departments, I'm talking about the financial sectors. I can make example of financial products that as a continent we could benefit from. A town here in South Africa, Durban, was hit by the floods in a while back now. But if we were using these Earth observation tools to monitor the environments, to study the weather patterns, we would have saved lives, but our financial sectors would have had a way of saving the funds as well that could be used elsewhere. There are a number of these insurance products that have been developed that could be used. I'm not going to go to our agricultural products that we use in monitoring our crops, because I think a lot of Earth observation people focus on that, which is very good because food security is of utmost importance in the continent, but not neglecting other applications as well that actually feed in to food security. I spoke of the finance sector because it has an impact on food security as well. In a town here in Cape Town, we are doing, we actually mapping the invasive alien plants, because we looked at the time when Cape Town was hit by droughts. Yes, we were not getting the rains, but the fact that the water that we had at the time was being consumed mostly by the invasive alien plants, it does raise a concern, because that is water that could be used for human consumption and for food security as well. So all of those sectors, if you look at it carefully, they are in a way intertwined. So working closely with the statistical agencies, you would be able to understand all the economic indicators, what is happening in agricultural productivity, the environmental conditions, urbanization patterns, changes in land use. All of that boils down to us as a continent saying, we want to have an improvement. Let's make use of the space data in addressing the challenges that we're having. And until we do that, we will continue be singing about what we're doing and people not understanding what we're doing and not getting enough support to do what we would love to do. So yeah. Statistical applications, I think we should start there. Thank you, Mustafa.
Thank you. Professor Jane Peters, my next question is to you. So you're going to touch on another critical aspect of the space evolution in Africa. There's been a lot of talk about developing or establishing an African spaceport. We've had rumors in Kenya. There's also reports from Turkey and Somalia. There's also the one from Djibouti and the Chinese firm. So, but one critical aspect to this would be the launch vehicle dynamics, right? If you have the spaceports, which launch vehicles are going to be operating on that particular spaceport? And your organization is one of such organizations that is trying to work around the clock to provide a launch vehicle, an African launch vehicle. So my question is, what do you think are the realistic prospects of an African developed orbital launch vehicle in the near future? Do you think there needs to be any policy or industry shifts for this to be viable? Thank you.
Thanks, Mustafa. Thank you also to Space in Africa for the opportunity. It's a pleasure to be here, and good afternoon to everyone. It's a complex question to answer, and I think I would reply with a question: how near is near future? You know, space launch capabilities take a long time to establish, and at the Aerospace Systems Research Institute, we've been going for essentially 15 years. We've been chipping away at the problem slowly but surely, and we've now gained a lot of momentum. So I think we can say with greater certainty that they've come up with an estimate for when we might be ready with the capability, and that's I would say if we're sufficiently funded, if we're sufficiently human resourced, we're looking at 2029 to be what I'd say probably the earliest date for test flying the vehicle that we're working on, the CLV launch vehicle, to microsatellite launch vehicle. So I'm not sure if 5 years from now or 4.5 years from now counts as near future, but at least from our perspective, that's the kind of time frame we're looking at if funding and comes through and we can develop enough human capital to support that program, which is complex. In terms of shifts in policy and in industry, well, in policy, I'm not really seeing a need specifically in South Africa for any shifts, and I can only speak in the South African context. Where I do see a need is on the regulatory side of things. You need pretty sophisticated regulatory frameworks to allow space launches to take place. And in the case of South Africa, we really don't have a regulation ladder that joins, so to speak, what happens on the ground with what happens in orbit. And that's the regulation that controls licensing of launch vehicles, of launch service providers, of launch complexes. So there's a lot of work to be done there, and we really do need to get moving on that side. In terms of industry, again, from the South African context, we have, it's been an amazing journey that we've been on for many reasons, one of which is we've got to see what is buried in South African industry, what kind of capabilities there are spread around the country. And they are quite phenomenal. There are some truly phenomenal companies doing amazing work. And, over a few years, we've come to realize that essentially probably 90% or 85% of the mass content of a launch vehicle, an orbital launch vehicle, such as CLV, could be built in South Africa using South African labor and South African technology as well. So from an industry perspective, I think we are primed and ready to go. There needs to be obviously a bit more resourcing from government, a bit more alignment as part of a greater program. But I think that's probably how I'd end off that answer.
All right. Thank you very much. So my next question will be back to you, Dr. Jolana. So we've reflected on what happened in 2024. So how about we talk about what the priority should be for the African space sector in this year to ensure that all the recent accomplishment and progress that we've made in the previous years, they actually translate into long-term sustainability for the industry?
Yeah, Mustafa, this is really a tough question. And I have to be honest that it won't be an easy year this year for a number of reasons. We see the geopolitics, the way it's changing, right? And Africa for a long time has been depending on external financial support, right? We see the way US is positioning themselves today, say we're thinking about ourselves first, and this is having a domino effect throughout the world, right? And what I'm concerned right now is that we in Africa, we think money can solve everything, right? But that is not the case. I'll just give an example. The space programs budget for Africa last year was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, on my note, was 20% something less than 2023. But still, we did more into 2024 than we actually accomplished in 2023, which showing that money is not actually the key issue for our space programs to have impact in the continent. So now, if we want to be sustainable and think long-term, we need to change some root causes why we're not moving with the impact that we need. I think Jesse touched a lot on the user side of things, and this is exactly what we've been missing, right? I've been saying this, Mustafa, doesn't make sense if you have like 60% or 70% of your population dying from hunger, no water, right? Nothing to eat, and you talking about launching capabilities, right? I'm not saying this is not important, right? It's important that we align, and I think the African Space Agency needs to come to this role and say, hey, listen, I think Angola should be champion in this, because if all the 55 countries try to imitate what South Africa and Egypt have done for almost half a century, we won't make it, right? It's impossible, right? It's not sustainable, right? So it means we need to work smart. And I always said that. Imagine, we depend on aid from wealth countries, and they are smart to share budget to be more efficient. How do you expect Africa to be successful when each one of us want to do their own space program, right? So what we need to do in 2025 is really rethink a strategy and coming more regional approach. And this is the discussion I've been seeing with the Africa Space Agency, really seeing how we can work smart to have an impact. So uh, just being specific, one thing that is killing the impact in the industry in Africa is with transparency. Mustafa always say that if you're not honest with yourself, you cannot get out, right? Sometimes in Africa, we dream we're doing things, but we are not doing these things, And if we keep lying ourselves after 10, 20 years, you don't get nothing accomplished. So the first thing, let's fix the most basic element here. Let's be transparent with ourselves with our space program, right? I've seen cases that you're building like a satellite for technology demonstration and you're bragging yourself that you're putting satellite in orbit. Some of this EO data that we building satellites to replicate, we're getting from Landsat, Sentinel for free. Can you imagine? Unless you're really building some type of capacity building, which you can do differently, right? What we discussed, for instance, Egypt is a state-of-art facility where you can go there, replicate, try, build satellites. You have this experience in South Africa. Send your guys there to do some learning, right? Don't lie, if I can use this strong word, to your government, say you're doing an amazing space program with impact that is not there, right? Today, we need actually to use more in 2025. Everybody's doing this out there. The tons of data we have available right now in EU, and use AI really to fill the gap on lack of skills that we have in the continent. Unfortunately, we only have one Professor Jan, one Professor Wet, and one Jesse, right? We need thousands of them in the continent if we want to make this happen, right? And AI can be a perfect tool to fill this gap, right? To crunch this data, to get insights, like what Jesse said. I'll just give an example, very quick example. Mustafa, 4 years ago, the Angolan space program was struggling with budget. The government says, Zolana, you're crazy. I need to build schools. I need to build roads. People need water. And you're asking me millions of dollars to build a space program? I was already building a satellite. Angosat 2 costed $100 million. I was asking a second one. The government saw the value, but says, Zolana, I can do that. Prove me that we have value. What we did on the last 5 years, we partnered with different partners in the continent and worldwide. We acquire data. We design products that today are worth it, tens of millions of dollars as product, right? And when the government saw that, says, Zolana, now I understand why we need this satellite, right? There is an impact. And very specific impact was, for instance, we designed just one of solutions, the team in AI, how you can increase your tax collection in the country, right? Our tax agency for tax property collection was only see 200,000 properties. And they were sending people out there to check where are these houses. And we designed a solution, you can map all the country, then they can see 10 million houses, and they say, wow, this is amazing. And you increase your revenue in tax collection, they see the value, and they say, Zolana, now we understand, right? So what I'm saying is, in 2025, let's explore what is existing data out there from satellites, from South Africa, from Egypt, right? Unless we don't have it in the continent. Some people say, Zolana, why are you procuring a new satellite? We identify a gap. Nobody has high resolution satellite imagery in the continent. And this is crazy. And we keep on building satellite, which has 20 meters special resolution, which doesn't make sense, right? And when we have critical situations, we talk with each other. Can you help me with the high resolution satellite image? Nobody have, right? We need to focus the gap, right? This is the new trend, and we need to follow having high resolution satellite imagery to feed the industry, right? Funding bottlenecks. I think I touched a little bit. This is, I mean, we can dream as well, right? In certain stages, we'll be able to do things, but without proper funding is another challenge. I think this is where I have to really commend South Africa. They've been doing amazing with the private sector. Actually, the private sector mobilizing a lot of these resources. This is shaping the industry. By the way, this is the new space trend, right? And from some countries, due to challenges in regulations, I'm jumping out to this, and policies, it's really hard. I'll give you an example for Starlink. Starlink have invested on their network $10 billion, only in satellites, right? We're not talking about launches and everything. So they want to come to help some countries to get connectivity, and we say, hey, don't come in, right? I would agree if you understand why you say don't come in. Don't just say don't come in for sake of your ego, right? Because we are here talking this. We are the ones who are fortunate to have internet connectivity, but you have millions of Africans right now. They don't have connectivity. We don't have time for egos, right? What I've been saying, and our governments are being very tough discussions with Starlink, what I say is, when those things come to the continent, we need to protect our sets and make sure that we understand there is an orange and not a banana. In some cases, what I've seen in some countries, they allow Starlink to come first, and then they realize the problems. So specific problems, what they are is that Europe or Portugal is different from country in Africa. I'll give an example. That guy doesn't have a credit card. He lives on less than $1 a day. He doesn't have electricity. So if you allow Starlink just to come and put a device, you never get that connected to the internet. It's impossible, right? So meaning that what we need to focus on 2025, because LEO is there wherever we like it or not, we have to start that we can do a multi-orbit design of satellite connectivity. Our existing investments on GEO live with the LEO, but design the ground infrastructure connectivity to give access to Africans, because right now we don't have it set up yet, right? Whatever we have is still very expensive. In some cases, we see that there is coverage connectivity, and we think problem is infrastructure, but it's not infrastructure. It's user access, because it's still too expensive for him. He doesn't understand. He doesn't have the literacy, digital literacy skills and levels to really be able to use the internet services. So lastly, in terms of gap, one of the biggest gap is missing something in the continent is someone that focus on user. We are all very focused on deploying infrastructure, upstream, downstream, midstream services, downstream, but nobody's talking to the user. I've seen a lot of cases I'm learning in Angola as well. When you present this to user says, Zolana, this is useless for me, right? That guy sometimes doesn't even talk English, right? So meaning we need to focus more, taking advantage of what to build very successful in 2024. And all these things are laid out. Really now to focus how we get this to the user in an African context, not in a foreign context. Thank you, Mustafa.
Thank you very much for that. I would not want to waste much time unpacking all that you've mentioned, but I'm sure that our listeners have taken one or two things from all these things that you've mentioned now. So I just want to take a bit of what you said now and throw that to Dr. Dari. Dr. Dari, you clarified LEO constellation and its applicability and implementation in Africa when you answered the first question. So I want to do something a little bit different but similar in the second question. We've seen cases in, say, Kenya with Safaricom coming out to say there's like a disproportionate regulatory aspect for Starlink versus what they're getting. We've also seen cases of other telcos, MTN, and other telcos in other countries coming out to say there's like countries are giving Starlink like an edge over them. So I wanted to also clarify this for us from your point of view. The ideal constellations now, we know, and you've already established that they are transforming global connectivity here. So do you see them as a complementary technology or as a direct competitor to the existing telecom and broadband infrastructure? And whatever the answer to that question is, what regulatory frameworks do you think are needed to now balance the foreign players that are growing dominance in all the countries? What regulatory needs do we need to balance their growing dominance and the need to protect local satellite and telecom business? Do you get all of that? I'm sorry. It's a lot. Do you get all of that, sir?
Yes, thank you, Mr.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think the regulatory aspect about LEO satellite is a bit of a complicated one. So let's take that as a second answer. Let's first just discuss whether the technology is complementary or competing. It's definitely complementary in the sense that there is still a position for satellite in the industry. I refer to it as a pecking order. I mean, fiber is the preferred option, then fixed networks, and then satellite. So from that perspective, satellite is and will remain for a while as the gap filler option. We've seen in some markets that Starlink very quickly reached saturation point. For me, it is slightly expected because really the technology is used in applications where it's not ideally meant for. So the constellation is inherently limited in terms of capacity. It is inherently limited in the number of total users it can serve. So from that perspective, it is actually meant to complement technology. It's meant to fill in gaps. It's meant to address other scenarios. So the demand, of course, is very high. So you do have a situation where the demand in Africa is very high. We have the fiber networks that's basically contributing wherever they can. And then we have the mobile networks, but the demand is still very high. So you will see basically that the technology is pulled into user applications where perhaps it's not ideally meant for. So that brings a little bit of an accelerated growth into saturation. So first point in terms of the technology, yes, very much complementary, with a bit of a comment that we would advise generally the market to use it a little bit more wisely in the sense. But then again, if something is available and it works wonderful, then people will use it wherever they can, whether it was meant for that application or not. Talking about regulatory, one has to really talk about what is the regulator's interest. And the regulator is actually fundamentally in the interest of the end user. Most regulators want to act in the interest of their country, in the interest of the users, and they really want a sustainable scenario. So regulators approach technology mostly from how do we act, make a decision, and contribute to a sustainable industry. And if you want to have sustainability, you need to look at the in-country support, you need to look at in-country capabilities. So I don't think necessarily that it is the regulators taking a position towards Starlink. I think what they are concerned about is the business model where you really have what I call the light touch. It's very a light touch of an in-country complement, which leaves the market generally not very much supported for support and for default and for things like that. So the regulators need to change and the regulations need to change. And I think in that sense, differently. What's creating a bit of a challenge, if we look at the architecture, we now have, interesting enough, if you just take a bit of a parallel between mobile networks took a long time to actually build the network. So there was a strong focus on building the network in the country. Now you have a situation that the networks was actually built in the sky, but now you have to actually regulate the devices in the ground. So where regulators normally tend to regulate networks and network operators, the situation with a satellite network is, well, that's really taken care of on an ITU level and on a global level. And what you now have in country is the users and the user devices. So it will ask, and I will shortcut the answer a little bit, it will ask that regulators approach it a bit differently. understand that the investment is already made in the sky, and that they maybe have to align the users, the local players, and the global operators. At the moment, I think it's understandable that there's an imbalance. I think just coming to a market, want to take a service, take the revenue out, and don't leave a footprint, naturally the market is not going to all be friendly towards that approach. In the same token, if you really want to apply regulations that is equally applicable to fixed infrastructure, I think that's not going to really be applicable. We've seen from our context in the South African market, ICASA has now started to unpack this, and ICASA has now put out a communication to request inputs to just really start looking at the satellite industry in a little bit of a holistic approach, looking at the gateways, looking at the operators, and looking at the user perspective. So Mustafa, in short, it's complementary. It's going to cover some critical aspects and some critical users. Definitely not the majority. It's, although there's a lot of awareness and we appreciate the interest, satellite is still very much a niche technology. If we cover 10 million users in Africa, it's a massive achievement for the technology, but it's still fundamentally a small piece of the general market. And to do that, we would need to have regulatory change, and we would need to have an update on the regulator. Let me leave it there.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. So my next question is to you, Jesse. So again, I'm going to take a bit from what Dr. Nolana said and also throw that to you, because so he mentioned the fact that, we don't need to launch satellites just for the sake of it, especially if we are launching small satellites with capabilities that cannot really do what we intend to do. And with the fact that there are a lot of free data out there, there's a Copernicus program, there's a Landsat, and all of those that are providing the required data for different kind of thematic applications. So the question I want to ask you is very simple. With the increasing number of satellite imagery data that is available for anyone, what do you think Africa's next step should be in developing our own AI-powered analytics and data processing capabilities?
Thank you so much, Mustafa. I think with the panelists, we having a tech team, because really adding on what Dr. Zolana had spoken about earlier on, in terms of making use what is already there, because he mentioned that a lot of people believe that we should have money to make things happen, but we can always look at what is readily available. He spoke of Landsat and Sentinel. We can make use of that. But as I've said earlier on, we also need to make sure that we have proper infrastructure. He also alluded to that we need to ensure that the people that we love or want to empower in ensuring that they do make use of these tools, they do have the necessary tools or devices to do so. So in terms of AI, we should also make sure that we don't have the over-reliance on AI, depending on AI for data processing without human oversight, can really lead to errors going unnoticed, or critical decisions being made without proper validation. So we still need to ensure that what you feed your AI system has been validated to a certain degree. But also we have to ensure that we implement robust governance frameworks to ensure transparency and accountability in AI systems. Regularly audits to monitor their performances, and also prioritize the ethical considerations in the design and deployment of these AI technologies for data processing. It is very important. 8 years ago, when we were designing our Hope set, we said we would love to do onboard processing, so that data that is received on Earth, would be ready to be used for decision makers. But unfortunately, as Dr. Zolane mentioned, as Africa, we cannot mince our words when we're talking about funding. We discovered that having an onboard processing system would make our system power hungry, which would have meant a bigger satellite for us, more launch costs and all of that. Then we decided against it. We met with a company that does data processing on the midstream. So as they download the data from the satellite, they automate the pre-processing up to level 2, which is great. I also discovered that they do a number of things. Unfortunately, I cannot mention that because I do not have a go-ahead from them to mention other ways of using AI in their ground stations. But also on the downstream, we are saying we need to have more constellations of satellites so that we can have near real-time data, so that should we be having any disasters, we can act swiftly and all of that. But the truth is, having these constellations alone will not give us near real-time data, because processing the data takes time. Until we can develop processes to automate these processes, we can't really say we have near real-time data. So AI is of utmost importance in ensuring that we do get that near real-time data so that we can act swiftly. But having in mind or being cognizant of the fact that we still have to have governance frameworks in place, so that we do not create a solution that would end up being a problem to us all. Yeah, so I think if we can look at all of that from the upstream, midstream, and downstream, automating the data processes would be quite useful for the sector.
Thank you very much. So my question to you, Dr. Jane. So last year, or maybe over the last couple of years, we know SIA have made, have reached different milestones. There was the launch of the suborbital launch facility. There was also like a couple of test launches for the launch vehicle. So, and you also mentioned, like, if we are looking in terms of time frame, we should expect it sometimes in 2029. So, but what do you think is the next phase in that particular journey? What is the next? There's the launch facility. There's also like different testing that has been done to improve the capability of the launch vehicle. What is the next thing for you now?
Thanks, Mr. Papa. I think, again, it's a fairly complicated question to have to answer. And I can only really answer it in terms of ASRI's context in South Africa, in terms of our ambitions, objectives. And I just wanted to put a little disclaimer in there that 2029 date is a no earlier than date. It's definitely not when it's guaranteed to be happening that we be able to launch the CLV orbital vehicle for the first time. But in terms of what happens next, well, I think the Sun Rocket launch facility was a bit of a labor of love, but it is an amazing facility, and we're super excited about it, because not only does it support our Phoenix launches, which are very centered on human capital development, but it will also support launches of a rocket we're now developing called Steve, that's going to be space capable. So for the first time, a completely indigenous South African, or African rocket for that matter, is going to be able to reach space. And moving past that, it's a facility capable of launching commercial or mainstream international sounding rocket missions. So it can launch various NASA rockets, various ESA rockets. So it's very, very helpful in that respect. And it's a really nice bit of infrastructure, putting a stake in the ground and saying, okay, we've started the infrastructure process. So to support a CLV launch, an orbital launch, we need a launch complex for that. And before that, we need an engine test facility for very rapid engine testing. So at least with ASRI, we'll be beginning construction on a major test facility during the course of this year. Hopefully it'll be finished by the end of the year. And that will allow us to accelerate the work we're doing on the Sapphire liquid rocket engine that's required by CLV to fly. The Steve rocket I mentioned earlier is very important to the longer term CLV ambition, because we're able to test various systems on a rocket that's very much more cost effective, that's much smaller, much easier to handle. So I guess that kind of gives you a picture of what ASRI's done throughout this time, is just incremental building blocks, putting them in place, being resourceful about how we use our funding, being resourceful about how we take advantage of local industry. So yeah, we're going to be having another very nice piece of infrastructure in the form of that engine test facility appearing at the Denel Overberg test range, which is where the sounding rocket gantry is currently. And then hopefully it won't be too long before the Sapphire engine development work is effectively complete, the main thrust of the R&D work. And we can move on to looking at testing, test flying CLV eventually, with a launching complex needing to be made for that. So, you know, I've got blinkers on. That's part of my job, to stay completely focused on ASRI's work. And there are also obviously opportunities for collaboration. So it would be fantastic for us to start flying some African payloads on our Phoenix launches. It would be fantastic to be able to start putting together African sounding rocket missions that can fly on NASA rockets or ESA rockets. It's all about momentum building, not just in terms of inspiration and interest, but also in terms of the human capital, the technology as well. So that's the journey we've been on, and that's kind of maybe where I'd leave it as far as where we're headed personally, ASRI side. What's interesting is we don't really have a very good idea of what else is going on in the continent in terms of launch. We know obviously that Kenya's now re-established talks with Italy about reinvigorating the Malindi site. We know that Turkey already has construction underway for a spaceport in Somalia. So lots going on we don't know too much about. But it's a pleasure for us to be at the forefront here, and we're really very open to collaborative possibilities.
All right, thank you very much. So there are many more questions that we would have taken, but in the interest of time, I'm sticking to the 1 hour bill. I would have to stop the questions now. And I'm very sorry to all our participants. Please, if you have any questions for them, they are very approachable people. You can take that to the bank. So if you have any questions, please, you can direct it to any of them via maybe LinkedIn or anywhere else. They would be happy to respond to your questions. But to take us off, Dr. Juliana, I wanted to give us like a closing remark, maybe 2-3 minute marks, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Mustafa, and thank you so much, Darwi, Jan, and Jesse. Amazing. I learned a lot from you guys. Amazing the job you guys are doing. And I think that's my closing remarks. We need to really leverage on what we already have in the continent and be cautious on what we do new, right? I would like to start saying that there is something that is coming, that is the inauguration of the African Space Agency on April 20. We are really excited because I think we're going to have kind of continental coordination of effort, resources to avoid duplication. I think this is one of our root problems, right? Maybe to be more efficient on delivering services. Yes, unlocking all these data that is available right there, right? And for the satellites we have and from foreign satellites, so that we can do the most important, the job creation and opportunities. You know, Africa is the youngest continent in the world, right? And if we don't create jobs, governments will be out of power and we're going to be chaos in the continent, right? I think that the space industry has really to look this very seriously. And how we can do that, I think for instance, the African Space Leadership Institute, A-Team, I don't know if he's in the call, has been doing an amazing job on trying creating opportunities for young Africans to get trained in the continent, right? And I think, Temi, A-Team, a recommendation, rather than having a lot of space policy things, let's put some things as well how we can train our young guys in AI capabilities on crunching data, solving problems for the continent as well. And as well as why not bring in the private sector? If you can just donate 1%, 5% of your budget to kind of be able to create different ISPs around the continent, right? We're not talking a lot of data. We can give them some data to play around 10 megs, 5 megs, just for them to get connected to the internet and learn, right? And this will create other opportunities, other jobs. I think this is what we need to do, right? And in a nutshell, Africa will be the future. Last year, Africa was the second continent in terms of economic growth in the world, and the opportunities are endless. Mustafa, thank you so much, and for all listeners as well. Thank you for the opportunity to share some of my knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Once again, thank you to all our speakers for sharing the insights with everyone. I've learned a lot personally, and I'm sure that is the case with everyone else on this program today. So I have a few information that I'd just like to pass to everyone. If you check the chat box, there's an information, a link that redirects you to information about a conference in 2025. Dr. Jolana talked about the inauguration of the African Space Agency, which in the simplest form is meant to curtail duplication of effort. You know, coordination of all the agencies of all the countries in the continent within one umbrella of a space program. So if you want to learn more about the African Space Agency inauguration, or you want to learn more about the New Space Conference, which is a gathering of like-minded new space ecosystem operators that comes together for 5 days to talk about the way forward in the industry. You can go through that link and, you know, learn more about it and hopefully register. We'll see you in Cairo in April 2025. So thank you very much, everyone. And I'm very sorry that we are unable to take your questions. I really hope that next time we'll have more time to take questions from the audience. And to one of the questions, I can take that now. Yes, we usually put out excerpts from all the webinars. So that will be ready later today or first thing tomorrow. So you can read about the excerpt. We'll also put the video on YouTube. So all the information will be posted on our social media pages. So you can just do well to go through them and see all of these things. So till the next time that we bring to you another wonderful topic with amazing panelists. Thank you very much, everyone. And